Well, hello everyone, Dolf de Roos here with yet another Discussions with Dolf. And today I'm coming from you from the beautiful coastal town of Positano on the Amalfi Coast. Many of you will have known of this, many of you have been here, I hope. Anyway, it is so incredibly beautiful. And if you haven't been here, maybe this will inspire you to make the visit. I can actually remember standing in a fish and chip shop, out of all things, in Christchurch, New Zealand, waiting on my meal to be cooked and wrapped up and delivered to me when I was reading a magazine, and the only magazines they had on the shelf at that time were what's called the Women's Weekly magazines, a very well-known magazine in New Zealand. And there was a feature article on the Amalfi Coast there, and I remember reading it and noting that one day I should go there. These days we would say I put it on my bucket list, but the concept of a bucket list in my mind anyway didn't exist back then. And now it's I guess 30 years later that I'm finally here, and as many of you know, I am blessed. I get to travel to many places, but this is in fact my first time in Positano. And one of the things you'll notice by the buildings behind me is that it is built on a cliff face almost. In fact, the buildings go up vertically more than they do horizontally, by which I mean in many settings they build out of many cities. They are 1 or 2 stories high at the most, but here most buildings are 4 or 5 stories, and they're not very deep because they just go up against those cliff faces, which is really interesting when you consider how are you going to build in a place like this. And in fact, today I took a bit of a boat trip to the town of Amalfi. You know, the whole coastal area is called the Amalfi Coast. I went to the town of Amalfi, and just seeing how they built houses and commercial buildings and hotels and churches on a cliff face is a real eye-opener, because it gives you ideas as to what you might be able to do in your neck of the woods or in wherever you live. In fact, I live in Phoenix, as many of you know, and their land is relatively cheap, and you tend to drive out because of the cheap land rather than build up. There are relatively few high-rises in Phoenix, and there are very few apartment buildings or condos, whatever you want to call them. But here, land is so scarce and it's so difficult to go out because of how rugged the landscape is, that you'll tend to have garages or garages on the ground floor, and then they'll have 4 or 5 layers above that. So most of the hotels are 3 or 4 stories high, but extraordinarily narrow. There might only be 1 room and a corridor deep. So often we tend to relate to things the way we're used to them, and I'm sure that if many people from Phoenix would have come here, if it were possible 300-400 years ago, they would have looked at this rugged coastline and said, well, that's absolutely impossible, let's go to a flat area where we can build more readily. But it's the Italians in this part of the world, and many other people, I guess, in other parts of the world, who've made use of what they had, and they figured out how to put roads in. Some of the roads here are so astounding, because you'll have a ravine where you try and figure out how can they possibly put a road there. Well, they have a tunnel through the rocks going to the ravine, and a tunnel on the other side of the ravine, and then there's this amazing bridge with this huge archway connecting the two. So their road building skills are exemplary, and similarly their building skills for building buildings, I guess. It's both a noun and a verb, but anyway. So you've always got to look at what can you do that's local. It gets very hot here. We've suffered with 38 degrees and the humidity is very high. I have gotten ideas myself at the place where I'm staying on how to do windows and doors differently. They have 3 layers here. The outer layer has just got louvers. They're not like plantation shutters where you can open and close them. They just fixed louvers which fold back and they clamp in place magnetically, or they fold forward and they close, and they block the sun completely, even though they still let the light in. Then you've got a layer of dual paned windows, but they're mounted in doorways, and the way the door mechanism works, so that when you turn the handle, it locks up top and at below and at 3 or 4 points along the spine of the door. Just absolutely astounding. And on the inside they've got another hinged panel, again not plantation shutters, but just a very thin layer of solid wood which blocks out light completely. So when it's time at night, if you want to go to bed and you like complete darkness, it provides that to a T. One of the reasons I really enjoy traveling and seeing not just other parts of the world and other scenery and hearing other languages and tasting different foods, but it's seeing different construction techniques and picking the eyes out of them and hopefully bringing them back to use wherever you live. So that's my little summary here from this beautiful, beautiful, tiny, tiny town of Positano. Hope to see you again soon, but in the meantime, I want to wish you, as always, successful investing. Thank you so much.